My neighbor just had a baby, and her husband died shortly after. She always had watery, reddish eyes. She would sit at her doorstep holding her baby, complaining that her pipes were broken, and that she was completely soaked. All the married men in the building would go into her apartment to help her for free. If any of their wives complained, even a little, the men would scowl. She lost her husband at such a young age. What's wrong with helping her? Can't you show some compassion? With this exact trick, she managed to get 3 neighboring couples divorced. Last month, Ethan and I moved in. On our very first night, she knocked on our door, wearing a loose robe with red, teary eyes. She looked at my husband, looking absolutely pitiful. "Mr. Vance, the baby won't stop crying and my breast milk is severely clogged. It hurts so bad. Can you please help me look at it?" Ethan didn't say a word. He just turned to look at me. I stood up from the couch, picked up my professional lactation massage kit, and walked over with a sweet smile. What a coincidence. I happen to be a certified lactation consultant, and I absolutely love cleaning out clogged trash. I slipped on my slippers, walked right past Ethan, and stood in front of Chloe Sterling. The motion sensor light in the hallway was on, clearly illuminating her silk slip nightgown. The fabric was incredibly thin, and the neckline dipped extremely low. The draft blew through the hallway. She intentionally shivered, leaning weakly against the door frame. "Mrs. Vance, you're still awake, too." She managed to squeeze out a weak smile, but her eyes kept drifting past my shoulder, staring straight at Ethan. "Actually, I was just about to sleep, but you woke me up." I shook the lactation kit in my hand, making a crisp clinking sound. "Let's go. Didn't you need help with a clogged duct? Lead the way." Chloe clearly didn't expect me to step in myself. She froze, awkwardly crossing her hands over her chest. "Oh, I don't want to trouble you, Mrs. Vance. This kind of thing is pretty awkward, and it might make another woman uncomfortable. Mr. Vance is strong and quick. He can probably get it resolved in no time. You think it's appropriate for a man to massage your breasts?" I pushed her apartment door wide open and walked straight inside. Without hesitation. It's much better for a woman like me to handle it. Chloe's apartment layout was identical to ours, but the interior style was completely different. The living room was filled with a strong clinging perfume. A few pieces of lace lingerie were scattered on the couch, and 2 wine glasses sat on the coffee table. Didn't look like the home of a struggling single mother who just had a baby. It looked like a love motel ready to welcome guests at any moment. "Where are we doing this?" I turned and asked her. Chloe dragged her feet as she walked in, pointing toward the bedroom. Her voice was barely a whisper. It was hurting so badly just now. But I don't know what happened. Feels a bit better now. I walked up to her and zipped open my kit. My professional massage hands went to work immediately. I prepped the tools for a solid 30 seconds, letting the scent of the essential oil fill the air. "Mrs. Vance, your hands are too heavy. My son is sleeping in the bedroom." "Just being thorough," I said. Put my kit heavily back on the coffee table. I turned to look at her. "Otherwise, if it gets clogged again in the middle of the night, you'll have to go knocking on someone else's door." Chloe's expression shifted. She took a deep breath, putting on that tragic, helpless face again. "Mrs. Vance, is there some kind of misunderstanding between us? I really couldn't handle it myself. It's the middle of the night, and I don't have a man to rely on. If you don't have a man, you can hire a cleaning service, call the building manager, or call 911 if it's a real emergency." Cut her off, my eyes falling on the high-heeled furry slippers on her feet. "But Chloe, it's past 11 p.m. Knocking on a married neighbor's door in that outfit, while holding a baby, that's not a very good habit." "You." Before she could argue, I walked right past her toward the front door. Halfway there, I stopped, pointing at a pair of size 10 men's leather shoes, sitting by her shoe rack. "You bought the wrong size," I said without turning back. "Ethan wears a size 9. If you've got your eyes on my husband, you should at least get his shoe size right." The moment I slammed her door shut, I could clearly hear the sharp sound of her high-heeled slippers, violently stomping the floor inside. When I got back home, Ethan was sitting on the couch researching some documents. Seeing me walk in, he immediately handed me a glass of warm water. "Handled?" he asked. "Just a home-wrecking bitch trying her luck," I said, taking a sip. "Watch your step when you leave for work. Don't let her get close to you." Ethan sneered, sliding his tablet over to me. "No need to wait for later. She's already starting her drama right now." I looked down. It was the neighborhood Snapchat group. Just a minute ago, Chloe had posted a message. The message in the Snapchat group was dripping with victimhood. "Thank you to the new neighbor, Mrs. Vance, for coming over in the middle of the night to help me, even though her massage was a bit too rough, and my chest is still hurting. I'm really grateful. I think Mrs. Vance might have misunderstood me though. She said some really hurtful things. It's just so hard raising a baby alone. If I wasn't desperate, I would never bother anyone. I'm so sorry for disturbing everyone's rest. Less than 30 seconds after she posted this, those lurking married men in the neighborhood jumped out like sharks, smelling blood. Apartment 302. Marcus, Chloe, don't take it to heart. Young people these days are just hot-headed and lack empathy. Apartment 5 o'clock, 01 Brad. Exactly. We're all neighbors. What's wrong with helping out? She's a single mother in pain. How could someone say such nasty things? Just because she knocked on a door? Apartment 604, Kevin, Chloe. Next time you need help, just shout in the group. We'll come over. You don't need to take attitude from certain people. Looking at this row of righteous comments, I was practically laughing from anger. They were basically calling me cold-hearted to my face. Ethan grabbed his phone, his fingers flying across the screen ready to fire back. But I pressed my hand over his. Don't waste your breath. Arguing in the group chat is exactly what she wants. It'll only make her look more like the victim. Just wait. Tomorrow I'll make her dig her own grave. The next day was the weekend. I got up early, changed into my workout gear, and went downstairs to jog in the community garden. As I approached the gazebo, I saw Chloe sitting on a bench. Today she had changed into a floral sundress, her long hair draped over her shoulders. She was gently dabbing her eyes with a tissue. A few older women and 2 middle-aged men were gathered around her, talking heatedly with indignant expressions. I slowed my pace and walked over. Morning, everyone. I greeted them with a smile, sitting down in an empty spot nearby. The air instantly went dead silent. The men who had been talking loudly a second ago immediately averted their gaze, pretending to look at the sky and the trees. Chloe shrunk back slightly, acting terrified. Morning, Mrs. Vance. Morning, Chloe. I wiped my sweat, keeping my tone casual. Is your chest feeling any better? I actually double-checked. And the technique I used is completely safe for nursing mothers. If it's still hurting, you might want to see a doctor. It could be meningitis. Chloe's expression stiffened. It's fine. It felt much better when I woke up this morning. Thank you for your concern, Mrs. Vance. Of course. I nodded, then turned to Marcus from apartment 302, who had been the loudest critic online. Marcus, I heard you're always looking out for Chloe. When she was in so much pain last night, why didn't she knock on your door instead? Marcus's wife happened to be walking back from grocery shopping nearby. Hearing this, her face instantly darkened. Marcus stammered. I was asleep. Oh, I see, I said, pretending to realize something. By the way, last night I noticed a pair of size 10 men's shoes in Chloe's entryway. Did you lend them to her, Marcus? Well, it makes sense. A single mother needs a pair of men's shoes by the door to keep intruders away. The moment I said this, the eyes of several women nearby turned incredibly sharp. Chloe panicked and stood up abruptly. Mrs. Vance, watch your mouth. Those shoes belong to my late husband. I couldn't bear to throw them away, so I kept them as a keepsake. Is there a problem with that? Of course not. I pulled my phone from my pocket and pulled up a photo. I had taken it on my way into her apartment last night. I zoomed in on the photo and thrust it right in front of her face. I heard your husband died in a car accident a year ago. This pair of Ferragamo men's loafers is from their brand new fall collection, released just last month. And they happen to match the women's slippers you're wearing today. Buying both pairs together cost over $12. I watched her face turn completely pale as I said word by word. Wow, Chloe, you and your late husband must have a love that transcends death. He's been gone for a year, yet you're still buying matching couple shoes with him. There was a deathly silence. Everyone's eyes locked onto my phone screen, and then they all slowly turned to look at Chloe's feet. Chloe's face went completely white. She tried to hide her feet, but there was nowhere to tuck them. The identical buckles. Without a doubt, they were matching couple shoes. The men who had just been defending Chloe now looked incredibly uncomfortable. In particular, Brad from apartment 501 subconsciously tucked his feet backward. How convenient. What happened to wear a size 10? Brad's wife, Tiffany, who was notorious for her explosive temper, slammed her grocery bag onto the ground. She pointed right at Brad's nose and screamed, Brad, you took $1,200 out of our joint account last month and said it was for your mother's medicine. You spent it on shoes for this bitch. Honey, let me explain. I didn't buy those shoes. Brad sweated profusely, trying to defend himself. If you didn't buy them, why are you hiding your feet? Matching shoes. I didn't know you had such a romantic streak. Tiffany didn't give him a second to breathe. She lunged forward and slapped him across the face. The scene immediately descended into chaos. Chloe was completely caught off guard by this sudden turn of events. He tried to grab Tiffany's hand. Tiffany, please don't misunderstand. It really wasn't Brad. Get away from me. You husband-stealing whore. Tiffany shoved her hard. Chloe fell onto the grass, clutching her ankle. Her eyes welled up and fat tears started rolling down her cheeks. Before, this pitiful act would have had men rushing to help her up. But now, under the murderous glares of their own wives, not a single man dared to move. I watched the drama unfold, coldly said nothing more, and turned around to continue my jog. For the next few days, the building was exceptionally quiet. Chloe didn't post a single thing in the group chat, and the male neighbors went completely silent. Every night the sound of breaking plates echoed from Brad's apartment. Marcus's wife simply packed up, took the kids, and went to stay at her parents' house out of state, showing no signs of coming back anytime soon. But I knew Chloe wouldn't just take this lying down. A woman like her, who was used to wrapping men around her finger, couldn't stand losing her reputation. What she hated most was losing control of the narrative. I was waiting for an opportunity to completely flip the script and crush me. On Wednesday night, Ethan was in the study hosting a video conference, while I was in the living room organizing a PR proposal for a client. Suddenly, a frantic knocking came from the door, accompanied by the crying voice of Chloe's 5-year-old son Leo. "Ethan, open the door. My mommy collapsed. Please help her." I walked to the door and looked through the peephole in the hallway. Leo was wearing thin pajamas, pounding on our door. Meanwhile, Chloe was lying on the floor a few feet away near the elevator, her face pale and her eyes tightly closed. Under normal circumstances, seeing a 5-year-old child crying like this would make anyone open the door immediately. But I didn't budge because I clearly saw that Chloe, who was supposedly unconscious on the floor, was clutching her phone tightly in her right hand, and the screen was still lit. Moreover, the spot she chose to collapse was highly strategic. It perfectly avoided the blind spot of the hallway security camera. Most importantly, although Leo was crying, his eyes kept darting back to Chloe as if waiting for a cue. She was putting on a tragic show, and she was using her own kid to do it. "What's going on out there?" Ethan heard the noise and came out of the study. I put my index finger to my lips, ignoring him to be quiet, and then pointed at the people. Ethan took a look, his brows furrowing. Instantly, he pulled out his phone, preparing to call 911. "Don't call yet," I stopped him. "If you call 911 now, by the time the ambulance arrives, everyone in the building will think you ignored a dying neighbor at your doorstep. Then what do we do? Just let her lie out there," Ethan whispered. I smirked, looking at the hidden pinhole camera we had installed, right above our people. "Since she loves acting so much, let's give her a bigger stage." The crying and screaming outside grew louder, and Leo's voice was getting hoarse. The commotion finally drew out the other residents on our floor. Mrs. Gable, the busybody from across the hall, was the first to open her door. Seeing the scene, she gasped and rushed over to hug Leo. "Oh my God, what a tragedy. Chloe, wake up." Mrs. Gable patted Chloe's face, then turned to slam her hand against our door, screaming, "Are the people inside dead? Can't you hear the child crying? Get out here and help," Mrs. Gable screaming. Neighbors from upstairs and downstairs started poking their heads out. Soon a crowd gathered in front of our door. Most of them were nosy seniors, but a few of the male neighbors rushed over, too, looking at our tightly shut door. The crowd grew furious. "What is wrong with the new family? They are so heartless." "Exactly. It's one thing for her to be sharp-tongued normally, but this is a life or death situation. And they won't even open the door. Then be a man and get out here. Hiding inside makes you a coward," someone in the crowd yelled. And immediately after, our door was kicked hard twice. Under the crowd shouting, Chloe finally woke up. She leaned weakly against Mrs. Gable, panting heavily, tears streaming down her face. Don't blame Ethan. It's just my own poor health." She spoke with a barely audible voice, but her eyes were fixed on our door. "I just heard that Ethan's mother is a doctor, so I figured Ethan might know first aid. That's why I had Leo knock. Maybe they aren't home." This was textbook manipulation. She managed to explain why she only knocked on our door, gave us an excuse to save face, and painted herself as a sweet, understanding victim. As expected, the crowd's anger boiled over. "Not home. Bullshit. Just walking downstairs. Their apartment has the brightest lights in the whole building. Break the door down. I want to see how they can look us in the eye." Several agitated men began looking around for tools, looking ready to smash their way in. Ethan stood beside me, his face grim. He clenched his fists and said coldly, "This is getting out of hand. If they break the door, we'll look guilty. Let me go out and set them straight. If you go out, you fall right into her trap." I held him back, my eyes cold. Chloe wanted us to open the door. The moment we stepped out, no matter what we said, the angry mob would see it as a heartless excuse. Banging on our door grew louder, and the metal frame groaned under the pressure. Leo's crying and the neighbors cursing, woven together like a suffocating net, tightening around our space. "Let's call the police," Ethan said, his phone in hand. "No need. I sneered as I looked at the footage on my phone, watching Chloe's pale but secretly smug face. I opened my Snapchat, found the chat with the property manager, Manager Carter, and sent him the video captured by our pinhole camera, along with several documents I had spent all of yesterday digging up. Let them smash it. I pulled Ethan to sit back down on the couch, calmly pouring 2 glasses of water. Just 3 more minutes. The real climax of the show is about to begin. Ethan stared at me, his fingers still resting on the keyboard of his laptop. The blue light from the screen illuminated the sharp lines of his jaw, tense with a mixture of anxiety and disbelief. Outside, the rhythmic, heavy thuds against our front door continued, vibrating through the drywall. "You're sure about this?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper over the cacophony of Mrs. Gable's shrieking and the angry murmurs of the crowd gathering in the hallway. "I'm sure," I said, taking a slow, deliberate sip of my warm water. The ceramic mug felt solid and grounding in my hands. Manager Carter might be a bureaucrat, but he's a bureaucrat who cares about 3 things: the building's insurance premiums, his own year-end bonus, and avoiding a PR nightmare that would tank the property value of this entire complex. What I sent him isn't just gossip. It's a liability trigger. To understand why I was so calm, you have to understand what I had spent the entire previous afternoon doing. While Chloe was likely plotting her next move, I had been sitting at my desk, leveraging every resource I had as a certified medical professional and a former consultant for high-profile family law cases. I hadn't just looked into Chloe Sterling. I had dug up her entire digital and legal footprint. The name Chloe Sterling was a ghost. She had arrived at our building 6 months ago, paying her rent in cash, claiming to be a grieving widow. But a simple search of the death registry in our state yielded no record of a Sterling dying in a car accident within the last 2 years under the parameters she described. What I did find, however, was a court docket from a neighboring county involving a woman named Chloe Miller, matching our Chloe's exact age and physical description, who had been sued by a prominent real estate developer for civil extortion. The modus operandi was identical: move into a high-end building, identify wealthy married men, stage domestic emergencies, and document compromised situations. The documents I sent Carter weren't just PDFs of her past record. They included bank routing details from a public disclosure in her previous civil suit, which perfectly matched the shell company account that Marcus and Brad had been transferring loans to over the last 3 months. I had also included a technical diagnostic of our building's shared Wi-Fi network, which showed a highly unusual, high-bandwidth local server transmitting encrypted data directly from Chloe's apartment. She wasn't just a homewrecker. She was a professional blackmailer running a localized honey trap. Outside, the shouting reached a fever pitch. "Vance, open this door right now," a male voice bellowed. It sounded like Kevin from 604. "You can't just let a woman die on your doorstep. We're calling the police." "Go ahead and call them," Mrs. Gable chimed in, her voice cracking with self-righteous fury. "The police will arrest these heartless sociopaths." "Leo, sweetheart, don't cry. The nice neighbors are going to help your mommy." I looked down at my phone. The countdown on my timer hit 0. Ding. The distant, metallic chime of the elevator at the end of the hall echoed through the concrete structure. The sudden silence that followed was palpable. The heavy thudding on our door stopped. Everyone stepped back from the door immediately. A loud, authoritative voice commanded. It wasn't Carter. It was the distinct, gravelly tone of an officer of the law. "Police department. Clear the hallway." Ethan stood up, his eyes widening. "You called the police?" "I didn't," I said, setting my mug down on the coffee table with a soft clink. "Manager Carter did." The moment he saw the server logs and the extortion files, he realized he had a felony operation running under his nose. He called them to execute an emergency search warrant on her unit, and he brought them up here to handle the medical emergency first. I stood up, smoothed down my workout leggings, and walked toward the door. Ethan followed a half step behind me. I unlocked the deadbolt, the metallic slide sounding like a starter pistol in the quiet hallway, and pulled the door wide open. The hallway was packed. At least a dozen neighbors were squeezed into the narrow space. Mrs. Gable was kneeling beside Chloe, holding a trembling, red-faced Leo. Brad stood near the elevator, looking pale, while Kevin and Marcus were positioned closer to our door, hands half raised as if they had been preparing to shoulder it open. Standing in the center of the hallway were 2 uniformed police officers and Manager Carter, who looked as though he had aged 10 years overnight. His tie was loose, and he was clutching a manila folder to his chest like a shield. "Mrs. Vance," Carter said, his voice tight. He nodded at me, a flicker of profound relief passing over his face. "Thank you for staying inside." "Officer," Mrs. Gable immediately shrieked, scrambling to her feet and pointing a trembling finger at me. "Thank God you're here." This woman, this horrible, cold-hearted woman, ignored Chloe's collapse. Chloe's little boy was begging for help, and they just sat inside and laughed. "You need to arrest them for negligence." The older of the two officers, a graying man named Officer Davis, didn't look at me. He looked down at Chloe, who was still lying on the floor. Her eyes were closed, her breathing shallow, but I noticed her fingers were still twitching against the screen of the phone she held tightly in her right hand. "Ma'am," Officer Davis said, kneeling beside her. "Can you hear me? An ambulance is on the way. Do you know where you are?" Chloe let out a soft, theatrical moan. She slowly fluttered her eyes open, looking up at the officer with a gaze that would have melted a stone. I felt so dizzy," she whispered, her voice trembling. "My chest, the pain was too much. I just wanted to ask Mr. Vance if he knew first aid. I didn't mean to cause trouble." "She's lying," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried a cold, absolute clarity that cut through the murmurs of the crowd. "Excuse me?" Mrs. Gable snapped, her face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "How dare you? She is unconscious." "She's about as unconscious as I am," I replied. I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen, casting a high-definition video feed directly to the building's smart monitor mounted above the elevator, a screen usually reserved for building announcements, which Carter had granted me access to override. "Everyone look at the screen," I said. The neighbors slowly turned their heads. On the monitor, a crystal-clear, wide-angle video began to play. It was the feed from the pinhole camera I had installed above our peephole the previous morning. The video showed Chloe and Leo walking out of their apartment. Chloe was perfectly upright, her face clear of any distress. She stopped a few feet from our door, leaned down, and whispered something into Leo's ear. She then pinched the boy's upper arm. Hard. The video captured Leo's immediate wail of pain. Then, Chloe carefully positioned herself on the floor, making sure she was lying within the frame of the hallway, but just out of reach of the building's standard overhead camera, though she hadn't accounted for my pinhole lens. She pulled out her phone, checked her reflection in the screen to adjust her hair and the neckline of her robe, and then lay back down, closing her eyes just as Mrs. Gable's door began to open. The hallway went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Mrs. Gable's jaw literally fell open. She looked from the screen to Chloe, then back to the screen, her chest heaving but no words forming. Marcus and Kevin took a synchronized step backward, their faces flushing with a mixture of embarrassment and sudden realization. "As you can see," I said, my tone conversational, the collapse was entirely choreographed. She used her own 5-year-old child as a prop to incite a mob against my husband and me because I exposed her little shoe shopping spree with Brad the other morning. Chloe's eyes snapped wide open. The helpless, fragile widow act vanished in an instant. She scrambled to a sitting position, her face contorting into a mask of pure venom. You crazy bitch. You're spying on the hallway. That's illegal. That's a violation of privacy." "Actually, it's not," Ethan spoke up, his voice steady and calm. "Under the building's bylaws, residents are permitted to install exterior security doorbells and pinhole cameras for personal safety, provided they do not record the interior of other units. We cleared it with Manager Carter yesterday morning." Carter nodded quickly. "That is correct. The Vances are in full compliance. However, Ms. Miller, or should I call you Ms. Sterling, you are not." Officer Davis stood up, his expression hardening. He looked down at the paper Carter handed him, then at Chloe. "Chloe Miller, also known as Chloe Sterling, Chloe Vance, and Chloe Higgins. I have an emergency warrant issued by the State District Court for your arrest on charges of felony extortion, illegal wiretapping, and child endangerment." A collective gasp rippled through the hallway. "What?" Mrs. Gable gasped, clutching her chest. "Extortion? Wiretapping? But she's a grieving mother." "She's a professional blackmailer, Mrs. Gable," I said, walking out into the hallway and standing directly over Chloe. "And she's been filming every single man who walked into her apartment to help her fix her pipes." I looked at Marcus, whose face had gone completely gray. I looked at Kevin, who was suddenly sweating so profusely his collar was soaked. "She didn't just want her company, gentlemen," I continued, letting my gaze drift over them. "She had pinhole cameras installed in her living room smoke detector, the digital clock on her nightstand, and even the nursery. She recorded every interaction, every casual touch, every piece of dialogue. And then she sent you those little anonymous text messages demanding loans to keep those videos from reaching your wives. Am I right, Marcus? Or was that $1,200 Brad borrowed from his mother's medicine fund actually a down payment to keep his marriage intact?" Brad, who had been trying to blend into the wallpaper near the elevator, let out a choked sob. He didn't deny it. He couldn't. Chloe sneered, pushing herself off the floor. She didn't look like a victim anymore. She looked like a cornered predator, her teeth bared. "You think you're so smart, Clara Vance? You think you've won? You don't have proof of any cameras in my place. You can't enter my apartment without my permission." "We don't need your permission," Officer Davis said. He pulled a second document from his pocket. "This is a search warrant for Unit 402. We have probable cause based on the encrypted Wi-Fi transmissions and the forensic financial data provided by the county prosecutor's office. Officer Martinez, secure the suspect. The younger officer stepped forward, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. The metallic clinking sound was incredibly satisfying.
No.
Touch me, and I'll sue. Chloe screamed, thrashing as Officer Martinez grabbed her arms and pulled them behind her back.
Leo. Cry.
Tell them they're hurting mommy. Call your uncle. But Leo didn't cry. The little boy was standing next to Mrs. Gable, looking at his mother not with terror, but with a strange, hollow detachment. He had clearly played this role too many times before. As Chloe was being handcuffed, the door to her apartment, Unit 402, directly down the hall, slowly began to creak open. Everyone turned to look. A man stepped out. He was tall, thin, with a sharp, angular face and a day-old stubble. He was wearing a gray hoodie, sweatpants, and most notably, a pair of brand-new, size 10 Ferragamo men's loafers. It was the late husband. What's taking so long, Chloe? The man muttered, stopping dead in his tracks as he realized he had walked straight into a hallway filled with neighbors, 2 police officers, and his handcuffed partner. Greg. Run. Chloe shrieked. Greg turned on his heel, attempting to bolt back into the apartment to reach the fire escape. But Officer Davis was faster. He lunged forward, grabbing the collar of Greg's hoodie and slamming him against the doorframe of Unit 402. Greg Miller. Officer Davis grunted, wrestling the man's arms behind his back. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit extortion, wire fraud, and violating the terms of your parole. Hands behind your back. The hallway descended into utter chaos. Marcus's wife, who had just stepped out of the elevator holding a grocery bag, saw Greg in handcuffs, saw Chloe screaming, and saw her husband cowering in the corner. She didn't say a word. She walked up to Marcus, dropped the heavy grocery bag onto his feet, and walked back into the elevator, the doors sliding shut on his desperate cries of, "Honey, let me explain." Tiffany, Brad's wife, came running up the stairs from the lower level. She had heard the commotion. She took one look at the police, the handcuffs, and the realization of what her husband had actually spent their savings on. She didn't slap Brad this time. She just looked at him with a cold, dead expression that was far more terrifying. "Our lawyers will be in touch tomorrow morning," she said quietly, before turning and walking back down the stairs. I stood beside Ethan, watching the entire house of cards collapse in real time. Chloe was dragged toward the elevator, her heels dragging on the carpet, her silk robe disheveled. As she passed me, she spat at my feet. "You ruined my life. I'll get out, and when I do, I'll find you." "I'm a certified lactation consultant, Chloe," I said softly, looking down at her. "I deal with toxic blockages for a living. You're just another clog I had to flush out." She screamed in frustration as Officer Martinez pushed her into the elevator. Greg followed, staring blankly at the floor, his expensive, stolen Ferragamo shoes squeaking on the linoleum. Within an hour, the hallway was empty. Child Protective Services had arrived to take Leo into temporary protective custody. The little boy had looked relieved as the social worker took his hand and led him away, promising him a quiet place to sleep. The other neighbors had slunk back into their apartments, too ashamed to look Ethan or me in the eye. Mrs. Gable had practically evaporated into her unit, locking her door with 3 different locks. Ethan and I walked back into our apartment and closed the door. The silence inside was beautiful, heavy and clean. "Well," Ethan said, leaning against the kitchen counter and looking at me with a soft, exhausted smile. "You certainly know how to make an impression on a new neighborhood." "I told you," I said, walking over to him and resting my head against his chest. "I don't like unfinished business. And I certainly don't like people who try to use my husband's shoe size against him." He laughed, wrapping his arms around me. "A size 9 for the record." "I know," I smiled, closing my eyes. "I got the size right the very first time."